few years ago, we had a chance to buy this 3.13 acres of land on Wilkesboro Highway in Statesville, North Carolina. It's good rectangular shape. It's got good road frontage, and we're getting a really good price on it because we thought that the land would be worth about $30,000 or more because you have a lot of similar sized property that was selling for upwards of $30,000. And we had gotten a price with the seller to buy that land for 15,000, which, with any luck whatsoever, would have been a really good deal. We could have made some money on. The property was really promising. I mean, you had a lot of new homes going up in that area. You had really good road frontage, 560 feet, which means that maybe you could even split that into multiple building lots. You got a nearby development in a growing area, and there's no reason at first blush to think that this land was worth anything less than 30K, probably closer to 50. But when we got closer to the date of closing, when we were supposed to actually buy that property, there's a couple issues that we realized that we had overlooked. And when you look at the topography of the property, what you see is that from the road, the land drops sharply down and to the right into the property. And that land continues sloping downhill to a creek that runs parallel to the road on the far end of that land. When you look at the county GIS filters, you see that the entire tract is what they call hillside terrain, which that's not good. When you go on the land portal and you pull the slope report on the land portal, you see how sharply the land drops down from the road into the property, which implies a very expensive site prep that has to do with significant grading, leveling. You have to bring a bunch of fill material in. You have to get some earthwork done to even consider getting a driveway off that road at a smooth grade that would be safe in winter conditions to even get into the interior of that property. When you look at the slope analysis on the land portal, the average slope of that land is 22.63%, and 70.98% of that property is what is called extreme slope. Extreme slope is defined as anything more than 15%. And so you could just say on average, the land here is extreme slope, which of course was the case. In fact, when you look at the slope analysis report, only 3.25% of that land is buildable, according to the land portal, which is an AI tool. It's not necessarily 100% accurate, but it's very telling. Because when you look at the sort of cluster report in the southeast corner, you see that cluster that shows the flat area that they're talking about. Well, you may have a home site there, except for the fact that that home site, that cluster of relatively flat ground, is within 50 feet of a blue line stream. So even if you could somehow get a driveway into that land, then you wouldn't even be able to build at the only flat location because you're within the riparian setback of that creek. To say nothing about the possibility of having bad soil for a septic system. If anybody wants to get this type of analytics and simple, easy to use, easy to follow, highly powered databases for any map of any piece of property in the United States, I'm going to leave a QR code on the screen and a free trial offer, exclusive free trial link to the land portal. You can try it for free for a week. I'm going to put that in the description below as well. And all of that is before you talk about the guardrail. That's right, you heard me. There's a guardrail that runs alongside that highway that blocks the majority of the entrance to that land. Now, to be fair to the Department of Transportation, who's responsible for maintaining the safety of that road and the mitigating against any damages that may befall a vehicular driver who goes and veers off that property, I mean, there's a huge ditch. So if you go off that section of road, it's not like you're going into like a cornfield. It's like literally the car is going to tumble. You have to put a railing there. The challenge, though, is that when you want to pull a permit to get a driveway into that property, even if you pay the price, even if you pay the price of the engineering and the earthwork, and you have a site plan that somehow, forces the driveway into that entrance, then you probably have to move that railing, which requires paperwork from the DOT, which requires, certain like visibility requirements, certain. They're just like it's not free. They're gonna require some additional steps. And the agent we were working with, the broker who really helped us in the early days of our time buying land, my time buying land, he was telling me, he's like, look, I'm surprised there's no flood zone there, because I bet you when they get rain, that creek is going to flood too. So just a busy highway, densely, wooded, bad terrain, bad soil, bad everything. But, I guess we were getting a good price, or at least that's what we were led to believe. I don't know. The agent was like, look, 20K tops, probably more like 15, and maybe like a little bit less on the resale value, which means that we were buying it at 15 grand, which even if everything went according to plan, we would be losing money after paying all the closing costs. And the agent was telling us, he's like, look, the comps are useless because the terrain of this property makes it uniquely difficult to build. And even though it should be worth 50 or 60K, the slope, the proximity to the creek, and the functional constraints of this property mean that we'd be very hard pressed to find a buyer. That's the advice that we got. And even if we could buy it for half of what we were contracted to buy it, if we could get it at 7,500 instead of 15,000, then it still might take a year or two to sell. And when it did, we wouldn't even make any money then either, once we paid the closing costs on both ends. And what was funny is I could tell the seller was amenable to working with us. I could tell the seller would probably have taken the 7,500. I could just feel it. But even if he did, I just wasn't excited about it. And we just walked away. We walked away like the day before closing. We decided not to buy it. He wasn't that happy about it, but it was the right decision. But the interesting question that whole experience raised on reflection is, why was that seller so inclined to give us a sweet deal on that land? I mean, why was that local seller, that local landowner, so nice to an out of town buyer that he'd never even met before? Well, the reason that seller pinned his hopes and dreams on us was because all the neighbors know that land is bad. Hello? Do you really think that we're the first person that's tried to buy that land? Do you really think that he's the first time that he's ever gone through the motions with another buyer of trying to sell that property? Do you think that any neighbor who lives in that area, who drives that road every single day and knows what we found out about that piece of land, would actually be the one to buy it? Obviously not. The seller's only hope was that some out of town buyer, some out of towner, some land flipper, some babyface land buyer who didn't know what they're doing would be the greater fool, would buy that land and hold the bag on that property for the next 20 years, like the seller had for the 20 years before it. But what's interesting is that just because the neighbors know that a piece of land is bad, and they always do, by the way, the neighbors are the ones who know. But even when they do know that a property is bad, it doesn't mean that it's always obvious. And that's what this video is all about. Because in this video, what I'm going to do is show you some real world examples of land that we looked at, land that we almost bought. And I'm going to show you some of the costly issues that the neighbors have known for years, but ordinary land buyers could have easily overlooked, even land buyers that visited the property in person. And if you overlook those types of mistakes, it's going to work to your severe and long-term detriment. And so this video is going to be all about how to avoid those costly mistakes from happening. This is a property that was one of the first ones that we were ever planning to buy. It was a 14.63 acre property in Gastonia. It's in Gaston County, North Carolina. Yeah, 15 acres, give or take. We're getting ready to buy it for 51,000. I thought it was worth 100,000. And the comps supported that, so it looked like we were going to make some pretty good money on that flip. And the way that you got into the property was a dirt road, and the main county road to the north was called Boyd Road, and the dirt road that got you into that property, it was about 1,000 feet in length. It was called Alexander Trail. My name's Alexander, so maybe that was good karma. That's kind of what I thought at the time. But when we were looking at the access 2 days before closing, what we could see is that on the deed, it clearly showed that there was a 45-foot wide easement a right of way where even though our land didn't connect up to the county road, we knew that we had the right to enter that property through that easement, going through the neighboring land where that easement was carried. And of course, our understanding was that the easement was on Alexander Trail because that's how you got to that property. And like you saw on Alexander Trail, there were neighbors on either side of the entrance of our property that had numeric street addresses on Alexander Trail that used that road for ingress and egress. In fact, we were so confident in the property that we had actually pulled a septic permit before we bought that land. And we sent the county environmental health office out to the property, and a site inspector who went out to the property, went up on Alexander Trail, got out of their car, went in the property. They dug some soil borings. They took some samples, and they actually issued the septic permit on that land. And they had no issue getting in and out. Nobody said anything. All the lights were green. Everything said, go, go, close the deal. But I don't know what it was. I think 2 days before closing, I was like, I don't know. Maybe we get a second opinion because we had an agent go out and look at it. They missed all this stuff, obviously. But there was this guy who I had worked with on another project, and it was a land broker in that area. I was like, just call him, get a second opinion. And that's exactly what we did. I called him. He went out to the property, and then he emailed me. And the first line of the email said, I went out to the property this afternoon, and there are some significant concerns you need to be aware of. What he went on to explain is that the current easement that gets you legal access from the main road to the property we were buying, although it's recorded and mapped on the county GIS, it's actually never been physically cut in or established. Based on the GIS land app, the easement starts at Boyd Road within a blue line creek bed. Without clear access and with neighboring no trespassing signs, there is no good way to access the property. There is no access through Alexander Trail to the subject property. See, we had a driveway and we had an easement, but we made the mistake of thinking that those two things were the same, and they weren't. The driveway that we had been using was not, in fact, an easement, no matter the fact that it had a street sign, it had a street name, it had mailing addresses, it had permanent residences. Guys, that doesn't mean anything because a private road is only as good as the documentation. And if you don't have an easement, or if the easement's not where you thought, then you have to go back to square one, because the easement that we did have would require tens of thousands of dollars in surveying, engineering, a culvert or bridge to get from the road across the stream, through the woods, over the river and through the woods, literally, before we get to grandmother's house. And once we get to grandmother's house, we have to pay all the contractors on that driveway project. And it could easily be 50,000, 100,000, no problem. And the thing is, like, if we would have bought that land at 51K, we would have lost like 25 grand quickly. And the closing attorney didn't say anything because we got the title report back and they saw that there was legal access. They didn't flag it. And this, I'm not blaming them. I'm just telling you, like, most agents would have waved it through, and then we would have put it on the market and we would have learned. We would have paid for that education. A little tip: if you have a legal description of an easement on a piece of property, or a boundary description, there's a lot of land that has an easement that has a meets and bounds written description of the boundary lines, or an easement, or both, on a piece of property. And you can tell that the precision of the description indicates that it had been surveyed before. But the problem is you can't always find a good survey map to show the meets and bounds boundary lines or the easement. But what you can do is what's called a deed plot. A deed plot is a very cheap and expensive service that any surveyor can do, where you give the legal description from the deed to the surveyor, and they'll put it into their software where they'll generate a two-dimensional map, an outline of the written legal description. And it's very helpful. We've used it a ton since this deal. But ironically, we didn't have to, because on the GIS maps, you can tell that the easement was not where we thought it was. It was just, I didn't even know how to read GIS maps at this time. So the property was landlocked. I mean, basically physically landlocked. And even though I would have lost 25K spending the 51 grand that I thought was such a great deal, if I was more experienced, like if I had had that property come across my desk today, I probably would have renegotiated to try to buy it for like $12,000, which is like an insane thing. Because if the seller was expecting 51 grand, then how could I reasonably believe that they would be amenable to selling it for 12? And the answer is because I've been doing this for years and I've seen it countless times and I've done it. Like, because like I understand what I'm talking about. And I think he would have, because I think that because he knew, like the sellers know, so he understood the deal and was like thinking I was going to pay him way more than that land was worth. And like, would have acted surprised if I brought it up, like, oh, really? Yeah. And the evidence that he would have taken 12 grand came through a couple months later when on public record, I found out after the fact that that same property, a couple months after we walked away from that deal, actually sold at 25,000. So there you go. Knowing what land is worth is like a really critical skill. It's also one of the most misunderstood skills that like exists in the marketplace for land. A lot of agents, landowners, surveyors, attorneys, title companies, and even some appraisers, they don't really know what land is worth. Ask around, ask around. And when it comes to land values, a little bit of knowledge goes a long way. And this is one of the areas I think that we've been helpful in really advancing the conversation, advancing the education on our channel. And it's one of the big motivating topics that led me to create the Land Purchase Navigator. This, guys, is a 5-hour self-guided online education product. It's a video course with immersive step-by-step guides, downloadable attachments, playbooks, guides, all the stuff that we've been using and that we've developed after flipping hundreds of properties and generating over $2.5 million in cash profit, flipping land across the country. We're packaging up all of our systems. We're putting it into a 5-hour video course where anybody can learn to buy land like a pro with no prior experience whatsoever. You do not need any prior experience at all. You just need the information. You just need the information. And then this course delivers it in a way that no other education product does. There's discounted pricing available on the course, guys. We're still kind of getting it out there in the world. At the time of this recording, it's like $197. I hesitate to say this because I know that probably we're going to have to change the price in the future. So at the time of this recording, guys, there's like a kind of a giveaway gift price on this product because I want to get it in your hands and I want you to benefit from it and get some testimonials. There's business reasons why we're underpricing it. It's not a $200 product. It's not a $2,000 product. Yeah, there's nothing like it at any price. I stand behind it. And if that weren't true, I wouldn't have gone through all the trouble to actually make the course because I have other things that I can do. And so do you. So if you want to learn to buy land at an advanced level without any prior experience at all, I really encourage you to check out that product. It's on our website and it's in the link in the description below also. We were trying to buy this property. It's 26 acres in Wayne County in a town called Dudley, North Carolina. Now it's actually ironically, it's like, this was several years ago, a couple years ago, but it's now listed for sale. If anybody wants it, here you go. 322 days on Zillow, 50 views, 1 save. That's not good. $399,000 asking price. I'll let you guess if it's worth that much. But it's like a nice piece of land. Like when you look at it, it's like a massive 26 acre tract of land. It's not that easy to find property this big, even in this rural market. I mean, that's like a pretty good tract of land. And the seller wanted 100 grand for it. Where at first we were looking at comps in different parts of the county, thinking that it might be worth 150, 165. So there may be a way to make a little money on it. We're just trying to validate our assumptions on the value of that land. But our local agent, our local broker who went out to that property was really helpful. And he was like, no, you don't want to buy that. And he's like, look, there's a couple issues you need to understand. Number one, it's not a good area. He's like, it's a lot of crime. It's a crime rate that's like higher than the national average, like pretty sketchy area in some parts of town. So kind of a tough neighborhood, number one. Number two, is actually when you look at the property, and you can see it on the satellite maps, you can also see it on the GIS and the land portal maps, which is you have like like a guy that's like going through the property for his driveway. There's like a homeowner who like doesn't live there, but uses a strip of land for their private driveway that goes through your property. So it appears to be an encroachment, or if it's an easement, then that easement cuts through a section of property that basically removes a lot of privacy and flexibility in the site plan. So that's not that good. There was a trash pile as well. There's a big pile of trash that you'd obviously have to clean up. The sellers are not going to generally clean up the trash. I wish that weren't the case, but it is. And that's why you're watching this channel. It was like timbered recently. So it's like all cut over timber. It's like growing in real thick. It's just like kind of, it was like ugly looking property. Like when you get a bad buzz cut, that's kind of what land looks like sometimes when it's clear cut timbered and the timber company comes through there. And then it starts growing back really, really rough, really thick. And then there's a section of trees in the middle of the property. It suggests that there may be a creek, which basically bisects the property and like puts some constraints on the site plan so that really you may have limitations on like using the front third, and the back part of the property may not be easy to get to. The cumulative effect of all these little or medium or large problems together was really catastrophic to the actual value of that property, because the broker that we were working with was saying, he was like, look, best case, 75 grand, maybe. You know, it's like, dude, it's just not worth it. Even if you can get it for cheap, it's like, you got to price it real cheap to sell it. And even so, like if this seller needs 100 grand, like how much lower are you going to get? So I think we tried to get it at like 30, 35, 40, and like, it just didn't work out. And the acreage, like the big acreage, guys, don't get distracted by acreage. It was everything else. The land that is now listed at 399 grand by the current owner that I guess we're the one we were talking to. That same owner that is listing it for 399 today bought it 6 years ago in 2019 for, you ready for this? 33,500. So have prices gone up 12 times, like 12x in the last 6 years? They bought it at 34. I assume on market, you know, and then there's trying to sell it for 12 times that. So, do you really think that prices have gone up that much, 12 times since they bought it in 2019? I'll answer that question with a question, which is, do you see any of the neighbors scrambling to buy that piece of property at 400 grand? I don't think so. Here's a property. It's an acre in eastern North Carolina. I'm gonna not say where it is for the privacy of the owners. You'll understand why in just a sec. So we're trying to buy it at like 10 grand, and we knew that there was going to be a little trash that the sellers were going to leave on the property for us to clean up at our expense. But we're here to solve problems, and that's fine. There's really no issue. And if you can solve problems for the seller, that's where the good deals come in, and we're happy to do it. No harm, no foul, no judgment. So the idea is like, we buy it for 10 grand, we pick up some of the trash. They have a trailer on the property that they were planning on removing. That's like the big bulky item. So that would be the majority of the cleanup, the expense. So if they're going to move that, a couple little bit of trash, and then you have a nice home site that for great manufactured home lot, you could easily sell it for 30 grand. They already got a 5-bedroom septic permit done on that piece of property, which is so helpful. And so, we're kind of putting this deal together around the budget to get the junk hauled away from the land. And we're thinking maybe 10 grand on a purchase price, another $2,000 or so in junk removal, just some of the debris around the property, which we'll put in some photos here. Another $1,500 for closing costs, another $500 for soil report, which even though we had the septic, we got the soil report done because the sellers were a little sketchy. I just wanted to get eyes on the soil. And so anyway, we're into this deal at like $14,000, assuming that we closed it. But, as we got closer to closing, the seller's story changed a little bit. They kind of changed their tune about the idea of them actually moving the trailer, because what they told us was that maybe they were going to leave the trailer too, or they wanted they wanted to remove the trailer because they wanted to keep the trailer. I can't imagine why. Because we'll show some photos, a couple of photos of the interior. I don't know why they would pay to move that and keep it when we were offering to get rid of it, but they wanted to move it, but they needed the money to do it. So the idea was like, oh no, you just pay us the 10 grand and then we'll do it after, right? Well, the problem is once they had $10,000 wired into their checking account, their motivation may shift a little bit. Maybe they might not actually, do that, which if they chose not to do that, then they would be leaving us with a huge slug of costs that we didn't budget for. And the trailer was in extremely rough shape. I mean, it's just not it's pretty grim, not good. It would need to be demoed and hauled away by professionals, multiple that would come out with heavy equipment to do the demo with big dump trucks, with like, commercial insurance policy. Like it's just, you need like actual professionals. The other thing was in the title search, when we were doing the title search, in the process of like buying this property, that we got the title report back, we learned that there was actually an outstanding judgment that was like a lien or a judgment against the property for a heroin possession charge that those sellers had. So it was like starting to be clear that they were drug users in the past and like potentially still. And so we had to basically scope out the costs of like removing the trailer in the case that the sellers bailed, which once they got the money was increasingly likely to occur. But the same junk guy that quoted us about $2,000 for all the miscellaneous stuff in the yard said that the trailer and everything else to remove and professionally clear out and haul away everything that was not natural, all the artificial junk on the property, would be about $6,750. Okay. Now, what we realized with the seller is like, hey, we can give you some money and we can let you have a week or so to move the trailer. And so what we wanted to do is what's called an escrow holdback. An escrow holdback was we're going to agree to the $10,000 purchase price and put that money in escrow. But when we close, we were going to release $2,500 to the seller and keep the $7,500 in escrow. The condition of that second part of the purchase price is the sellers have to remove the trailer, because if they don't, then they're sticking us with a bunch of costs that we didn't agree to. So it's called an escrow holdback. And they had agreed to that. We're going down the path of doing that, except for the husband got locked up. The sellers, like the wife was our contact. She kind of went quiet, and then a week later she's like, yeah, my husband, like, he's locked up. I don't know what for, but you could take a wild guess. So that put the deal on hold for a couple months. We didn't really hear from them. But they signed a purchase agreement. But if the husband's in jail, I mean, and like you can buy property from people in jail, so he can sign documents. So even though that was probably true, it's still a smokescreen, because like you can send a notary into a prison. I've done it. That people in jail, like, they have like rights. You can still own property in jail. It's not like that big of a deal in the grand scheme. So, but it was just smoke screen too, and like I just want to sell or whatever. And so a couple months later, the husband, I guess, gets out. He calls me and he's like, "We need 20K." He renegotiated. He wanted more. He wanted more now. And like he had emphasized to me how like if we did the junk removal, the escrow holdback, he was like, I'm a seller. I'll do it. He had totally agreed to follow through on the previous number. But he wanted $20,000 now, and I asked him why, and he was like, "Well, the tax value went up. It used to be 25K, now it's 45K." So the tax assessor, they put a number on a piece of paper in black ink, and the number changed, and now he wants more. So what I explained to him, and I'm laughing because like I struggled with this. The tax value, it's like black and white letters, dollar sign, appraised value. It's like seems so serious. And like it's so hard because I'm going to tell you not to put any stock in it. And if you buy enough land, you'll learn that it doesn't matter. But it was hard for me to take that advice because it was a number in the absence of any other real data points, it was like a data point that people that had inside knowledge of the local area had decided to assign that number to that property. It's very hard to ignore, very hard to ignore. And um what I told him was like, well, if you want them to lower it back to 25,000, if you think 45,000 is high, because they're going to tax you more at 45,000. So if you want them to lower it back to 25,000 or heck even lower than that, you can just call the assessor's office. They'll change it for you. He was like, what? What I explained to him is like that it's not a poker chip. It's not like one of the poker chips at the casino where you can like walk it up to the window and redeem it. And beyond that, I've literally done this. I've had a property that was a lakefront property that I was in the process of selling. This was like early days, where it was a property that like had an assessed value, something like 22,000, 24,000, 21,000. And it would have been worth that except for it didn't perk. So you couldn't put a septic system on there, which means you couldn't build a residence there, which means that it wasn't worth 22 grand. So we ended up having to renegotiate, bought it real cheap, and then we were selling it at like 7,500 to a guy. The guy who was buying this lakefront property from us was like, hey, I don't want to buy this land at 7,500 when the assessed value is 22K because I'm going to be taxed on it at the higher value every single year in perpetuity. And maybe they change it if I buy it at a lower price, but maybe they don't. And so can you get that number lower? And I don't want to say where this property was because I don't want to get anyone in trouble in the county office, or maybe not, I don't even know if they'd be in trouble, but I'm just like telling you for sure this happened. I called the assessor's office and I was like, hey, this property doesn't perk. So like it's like I own it, like I can't sell it for like 22 grand. So the person that's buying it wants to see if like we can lower the assessed value. And the assessor was like, it's like, sure, what number do you have in mind? And I was like, I don't know, like 5 grand. And he was like, okay, you just change it. Now, some counties have processes, some don't. Some you just call them, and if they're in a good mood, they'll just change it on the spot to whatever, to whatever. And this is what people need to understand. And like when I was talking to the seller, thing is, guys, like it wasn't about this. He just wanted more cash. He wanted to turn the screw. That's it. He's not a high integrity guy. His name's on a piece of paper with an agreement to sell, and that it's not worth the paper it's printed on. His word does not hold much water. And eventually he came down from 20K to 12K for no reason. He just wanted to get what he would just take $100, like $100 more. He would default on the contract for like $50, whatever he could get out of us at the closing table after we were gonna like pay him 10 grand, clean up all the mess, pay all the closing costs, close in 3 weeks. So, um, I was like, no, dude. And so what, guys, like you can't chase these deals. Everything you do to chase these deals costs money. Everything you do to buy land costs money. Your time, your energy, your focus, the title report, the soil report, the septic permit, the junk removal. It just goes on, and you cannot do business with sellers like that. Because if there's one thing that I've learned over the years, it's that you get more of whatever it is that you tolerate. And if you tolerate sellers backing out of deals last minute, holding the tax card over you and twisting your arm for $2,000, you're going to get exactly what you bargained for. And I wasn't going to let that happen. This is a couple tracts of land, a couple small building lots outside Atlanta. Take a look at these. Fantastic neighborhood, really nice homes. Homes are selling for 300K to 500K. And these two lots were listed on the market. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but there were two adjacent building lots, both just under 1 acre in size. Homes all around them. And these two lots, it was something like they were listed at like 125 for the two together. I had gotten like a call back from the owner. She had it listed, but she like was talking to me directly. I didn't even know they were listed. And I offered like 55 grand on a property that was listed for like 125. And she was like, okay, sure. And that was like not a great sign, not the best initial impression, but whatever. I'm gonna roll with it. And I was like advocating for this deal. I was so happy about it. I was like, oh, this is really good. It's a really good property. It's definitely going to work out. We're actually getting ready to close, but there's a couple things in due diligence that came up that we didn't really like. And the first thing that we saw was that when you look on the land portal, you see the 500-year flood zone. So you see the zone X, the 500-year flood that goes through the majority of those two properties. The biggest clue that this was an issue was that you actually like follow the floodplain, the 500-year floodplain, and you see there's like really no construction in that area in the 500-year flood, which was vexing to me because in all cases that I had seen, in like countless examples, the 500-year floodplain, they call it that because there's a 0.2% annual chance of a flood event actually covering that mapped area. And they call it the 500-year flood because 0.2% per year on average will take 500 years statistically for that flood to actually occur. So in most areas, the 500-year floodplain isn't actually regulated, meaning there are no additional building regulations or floodplain permitting regulations beyond just being outside the flood zone entirely. Most of the floods, when you talk about flood zone, you're really talking about the 100-year flood. That's like the area that's synonymous with all the, the base flood elevation, the base flood elevation certificate, the design flood elevation, the raised building foundation. Those are attributes of building in a 100-year floodplain generally. But when we talked to the county, it was like, hey, are there any regulations for the 500-year flood? They're like, no, it's fine. It's fine. All you have to do is you got to get a floodplain certificate. You got to get a base flood elevation certificate. You got to get a surveyor out there. You got to get a soil science. You got to get a geotechnical. So they were like, yeah, that's something. And then they listed out like 11 different things that like obviously would prevent the normal person, like a normal human being with a pulse would be like, okay, yeah, we can't build here. But they were like somehow acting like it was no big deal. But guys, like instantly you get closer to some of these cities. Oh boy, did they love their rules. Ooh. Rules, man, that they're just keeping people safe out here. And so basically the 500-year flood, there was like nominally no regulations, but it would have just been a total bear. And actually, when you look closely, you see that just kind of weird, marshy, wet soil on that land too. And so it's probably a wet area, which is a big deal for basically like the load bearing capacity of the soil for like a building foundation. This is where you want to get like a geotechnical soil evaluation so you can understand like are there any additional requirements of the building foundation so that you have to kind of manage the soil conditions. But when the soil's wet, you have the additional difficulty of moisture getting into the building foundation. So you had all these issues. The other thing is that the properties, the sewer line wasn't quite extended to that part of the subdivision. And so the homes that are just near us, they're on septic, even though there's sewer, I guess, in the earlier part of the subdivision. So you have to like, assuming you can't put a septic system in, which is like generally a reasonable assumption, you have to pay to extend the sewer lines. The neighbors know this land is bad. You think the next door neighbor that lives on Sherbrooke Court is confused about the fact that those lots aren't buildable? Of course not. And this is why we passed on the deal, because it was like unclear at any price if there would be like any value to a buyer on the open market that we could actually sell this land to build a home. Because even if it was buildable, the average person who's in the market to buy property in this area is just going to go and buy a different property because this one doesn't work well for so many reasons that I mentioned in this video. And I do hope that you enjoyed this video. I want to actually connect the next video on our channel. I think that you might enjoy it even more, because if you like this next video is going to get you much more deep into the actual details of how you use land mapping systems that are available to us now to easily evaluate and research any land in America. That is the next video on our channel. I think you're really going to like it. Thanks for watching, guys.